Does the West have what it takes to take on ISIS? Australia's Prime Minister makes me doubtful. The day has arrived. The Philippines steps in front of judges at the International Court of Arbitration to make its case against China. Plus, Gao Yu appeals her prison sentence. These stories and regional headlines are coming up next. This is the Asia Brief. Hey there everyone, Steve Miller here on this hump day. That's right, Wednesday, November 25th, 2015. Thank you so much for joining me, whether you're doing so on our website or by downloading the podcast in your favorite application. Let's go ahead and get started with our first news story today, which features analysis from Australian Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull on the West's commitment to take down ISIS. With the Paris attacks, the world is finally coming to the realization that ISIS is a cancer that needs to go the way of the dodo. But is there enough conviction to see that mission through to completion? Well, that's doubtful. And I say that because of Australian Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull. In a speech to Parliament, he said he did not intend to change Australia's military commitment to Iraq and Syria in response to the Paris attacks or the recent attacks in Africa and Lebanon. Furthermore, Turnbull noted that there was no support currently for a large U.S.-led Western military operation to attempt to conquer and hold ISIL-controlled areas, which frankly is sad. It shows that world leaders are afraid, not necessarily of terrorists, but rather of their constituency, that they are more worried about staying in office rather than eliminating one of the greatest threats to peace the world has seen since the end of World War II. Politicians aren't the only ones with aversions to so-called boots on the ground. The general public has grown accustomed to drone strikes and long-distance attacks. Those are great for taking out command and control targets, but doesn't necessarily directly address ISIS's greatest asset, its ranks. Make no mistake, airstrikes and other remote operations does take the fight to ISIS, but it won't put the nail in their coffin. The only way to do so is by carrying out a two-pronged approach. One prong requires tackling the perverted message ISIS sends, which, gauging by some reports of anti-Muslim statements, is a task we are failing. A concerted effort needs to be placed on education, because if one person believes that a Muslim person is simply a terrorist because of their religious affiliation, then ISIS has succeeded in tearing our community apart, and that makes us weaker. The other prong requires taking the fight to the group's doorstep. It's a sad, disgusting reality, but that's war. It isn't clean. It isn't sanitary. It's a dirty business, and people get hurt and killed doing it. There are ways to minimize casualties, and remote operations fulfill that. But eventually, it comes down to door knocking. Philippine Foreign Ministry spokesman Charles Jose summed things up perfectly when he noted on Tuesday that the Permanent Court of Arbitration in The Hague would now hear the meat of the Philippines' case against China for its activity in disputed waters. It is a case of monumental importance, not only for the Philippines, but for a host of other nations with competing claims that include Vietnam, Taiwan, Malaysia, and Brunei, just to name a few. Manila is formally asking the court to recognize its claims, which would then give it a coveted 200 nautical mile zone from the shorelines off the bits of land China wants, and with it, all the natural rights that go along with it. By doing so, they're essentially asking the court to strike down China's 9-dash line. Jose said Manila is confident that they will get a favorable decision on at least some of the issues, but that it would be unrealistic to expect that they would get a favorable decision on all issues. Now, it should be noted that while the court's rulings are binding, there's absolutely no mechanism in place to actually enforce them. And thus far, China hasn't paid much attention to the court proceedings, even going as far as to say that the court is no longer legitimate. So it's not only important to watch out for the verdict, but also how China responds. Rand Corporation's Scott Harold says China needs to essentially play ball and adhere to the process, or risk being an international outlier, the one country that refuses to do what's expected and normal. However, given China's rhetoric, they actually may be prepared to go that route. As I mentioned earlier this year, Gao Yu, a veteran Chinese journalist, was sentenced to 7 years in prison for allegedly linking International Communist Party documents to a foreign news organization. That document supportedly warned of the threat that Western ideals such as democracy, human rights, and freedom of the press posed to the Communist Party's power, which, well, let's face it, those ideals do. They simply fly in the face of how China operates. Now, Gao is known for being outspoken and has been charged with leaking state secrets before. In fact, she's also been in jail before. Right after the Tiananmen Square protests in 1989, she spent more than a year in lockup. On Tuesday of this week, yesterday, she appeared in Beijing's High Court to appeal her sentence. She reaffirmed her innocence, but like most proceedings in China, they were conducted behind closed doors. Benjamin Ishmael, the head of Reporters Without Borders Asia-Pacific desk, said, quote, "We condemn the Chinese judicial system's lack of transparency. The foreign embassies, whose representatives were turned away, should publicly protest against the court's decision to hold a closed-door hearing. We reiterate our call for the release of Gao Yu, who did none of the things she is alleged to have done." End quote. Gao's lawyers have requested hearings 3 times before, but until now, they've all been denied. Gao also suffers from a heart ailment and swelling of the lymph nodes in her neck, which seems to be worsening, prompting Reporters Without Borders to note that that is an additional reason to grant her release. In 2015, Reporters Without Borders ranked China 176th out of 180 countries in their most recent Press Freedom Index ranking. Only the Syrian Arab Republic, Turkmenistan, North Korea, and Eritrea rank worse. In addition, there's an estimated 107 journalists imprisoned in China. And taking a look at other headline news across the region, UN Secretary Ban Ki-moon says the discussions with North Korea are ongoing regarding his proposed visit. He notes he's received positive signs recently and that they are discussing when would be a good time for the world leader to touch down in Pyongyang. Now, personally, I'm of 2 minds about this. North Korea is a member of the United Nations, so a meeting with the Secretary General is something that other state leaders do, but it also plays into the regime's propaganda machine. A Bangkok military court has indicted 2 men accused of carrying out the August 17th bombing at a popular shrine that killed 20 people. The court indicted Bilal Mohammed and Mariali Yusufu on 10 counts connected with the blast, including conspiracy to explode bombs and commit premeditated murder. Now, it should be noted that Thai authorities have not labeled the attack as one regarding terrorism, so the men haven't been charged with those specific crimes. Also in Thailand, the junta leader, Prayut Chan-o-cha, repatriated 2 refugees back to China at Beijing's request, saying that they had entered Thailand illegally. The UN High Commissioner for Human Rights said Thailand should not have done so, as the act will most likely put the individuals' lives in danger. The men, Jiang Yafi and Dong Guangping, both held UN letters of protection and were waiting to go to Canada. Prayut contends that the men violated immigration laws in Thailand and that his government was unaware of their protected refugee status. Chaw Tanditun made a Facebook post allegedly poking fun at Myanmar's army chief. As a result, she's been charged with violating junta-era defamation and electronic laws and happens to face up to 5 years in prison. Her lawyers have unsuccessfully tried to get some aspects of her case dropped, but unfortunately, the case highlights the growing freedom of expression concerns rights groups have been bringing to the attention of the world stage, as a growing number of critics have been finding their way into the courtroom or behind bars. And finally, Vietnam passed changes to laws on the books that acknowledges transgender people and gives them the right to change gender on legal documents. Under the new law, which goes into effect January 1, 2017, people who undergo sex change operations would have rights and obligations to register for changes in civil status and have the personal rights associated with their new gender. Well, my friends, that's going to do it for me today. Thank you so much for joining me. If you have a thought, if you have an opinion, I'd love to hear from you. So please write in your comments or send in an audio file. The Asia Brief is a special feature of the Asia News Weekly podcast. If you enjoyed the podcast, please share it with your friends, and if you haven't, subscribe. Subscribing is free, and when you do, the next episode is delivered automatically to you. You can subscribe on our website, asianewsweekly.net, or in your favorite podcast application. You can also keep up with more news from the region by following Asia News Weekly on Facebook or Twitter. And if you have any comments, questions, or feedback, be sure to drop us a line. That email address is podcast@asianewsweekly.net. Thank you so much for joining me, and until next time, remember to be true to yourself and to always be awesome.